Here's something surprising. A controversy that looks like a crisis for the Church might actually push more bishops to expand the traditional Latin Mass, not restrict it. Let's talk about why. Recently, the Society of St. Pius X, known as the SSPX, carried out a second round of episcopal consecrations at Icone, meaning they ordained new bishops without permission from Rome. This is a serious matter. Even many Catholics sympathetic to tradition agree that consecrating bishops without papal approval isn't something that can simply be excused, regardless of how difficult things feel in the Church right now. But here's an important point worth considering. Maybe this situation can teach the Church something valuable going forward. If Catholics who love the traditional Mass feel welcomed and supported within their own diocese, they're far less likely to look for that spiritual nourishment somewhere outside the Church's normal structures. In simple terms, when the old Mass is treated as something suspicious or unwanted, some people may eventually search for it elsewhere. But when it's offered generously, people are far more likely to stay rooted in full communion with Rome. Some bishops already understand this. Bishop Fredrik Hansen of Oslo responded to the situation by reassuring Catholics attached to the Old Mass that he would expand its availability if needed. That's a meaningful message. It tells the faithful they don't have to choose between staying obedient to the Church and continuing to worship in a way that has deeply nourished their faith. This mirrors something Pope St. John Paul II did back in 1988 after the original SSPX consecrations. Through a document called Ecclesia Dei, he asked bishops to apply permission for the older Mass generously. His approach recognized something important. Correction alone isn't always enough. People also need a safe, welcoming place within the Church to continue practicing their faith. To be fair, the SSPX has said publicly that their disagreement with Rome goes beyond the liturgy. It touches deeper theological questions from the Second Vatican Council, including topics like religious liberty and ecumenism. Even if one doesn't agree with SSPX's conclusions, it's worth acknowledging that, over the years, many traditional Catholics have felt inconsistent treatment, sometimes welcomed, sometimes restricted, often depending simply on who happens to be their local bishop at the time. Still, none of these frustrations justify actions taken outside the Church's authority. At the same time, there's a real concern that this controversy could be used by some as an excuse to further restrict the traditional Latin Mass altogether, treating every traditional community as a potential threat. That would be an unfortunate and unfair response to a complicated situation. There's also the case of the priestly fraternity of St. Peter, a community that specifically chose to remain in full communion with Rome back in 1988 rather than follow Lefebvre. Even so, nearly 40 years later, they still don't have a bishop of their own, something many traditional Catholics see as a sign that faithful obedience hasn't always been met with lasting stability. At the parish level, the solution seems simple. When Catholics who love the older Mass are welcomed, supported, and given a stable, lawful place to worship, they're far more likely to remain securely within the Church they love. So here's a question worth thinking about. Could expanding access to the traditional Latin Mass actually be one of the best ways to protect Catholic unity going forward? Share your thoughts below. This is a conversation worth having honestly and respectfully.